The first environmental consideration for windsurfing is construction of facilities. So for example, most clubs use a lake of some sort for their windsurfing activities, which means lakes are found in natural areas, which means surrounding areas such as trees and plants and bushes will have to be cut down, and a clubhouse, somewhere to change, equipment areas would have to be put in place, which means this could have an effect on either the nature around it and the wildlife, as some of the natural habitats may have to be cut down, and this would have a negative effect on the environment surrounding the lake. Another environmental consideration is a national nature reserve, and these are areas designated to put wildlife first. And if windsurfing was to be practiced on a lake, then the wildlife in the water, for example fish or any type of other wildlife such as plants, they would be disturbed, as there would be people in the water constantly treading on them. The fish would be disturbed because there would be boats in the water as well, and there would be humans in there, so this could cause them distress as well. And a national nature reserve in the local area is the South Downs National Park, and this means that windsurfing on any lakes in the South Downs will not be able to take place because this is a nature reserve. A safety consideration for windsurfing would mean to put the AALA in place, which is the Adventure Activities Licensing Authority, and this came into existence in April 1996, and it ensures that activity providers follow good safety management practices, and this allows young people to experience exciting and stimulating activities outdoors without being exposed to avoidable risks of death or avoidable injury. And for this scenario, they would have to go through the AALA to be able to allow people to windsurf on the lake, so they would give guidelines to what would have to be put in practice. So for example, the strong winds on that day, the AALA would say you have to make sure that they are aware of the risks surrounding them on that day and what could injure them, have any preventable measures to put in place, and also safety equipment as well. Leading on, another safety consideration for windsurfing is the PPE, which is personal protective equipment, and this includes things such as buoyancy aids, shoes, wetsuits and helmets if possible, and this we're giving out in the scenario to keep the people on the water safe. Now, scenario 2, orienteering. The first environmental consideration is the Crow Act, which came about in 2000, and this is the Countryside and Rights Way of Act, and this gives you the right to walk freely in vast areas of countryside in England and Wales, which means not using designated paths. However, you cannot walk freely. So this means the people in the orienteering scenario would have had to have planned their route before. So for example, they've taken part in a recreational orienteering activity in Lancing Ring, which is a designated orienteering area. So this means they've abided by the Crow Act, and they have checked that they're actually allowed to do that before they have taken part in the activity. Another environmental consideration is erosion, which is an aspect of the 4 key environmental considerations. And this is the gradual destruction or reduction of something through continual wear and tear. So if they were to continue to come back to Lancing Ring and there was a lot of people involved, such as 15, which means there's maybe in a small space there's a lot of people, then erosion of the surrounding area, such as maybe the ground or even rocks around them, they would be worn down by the people constantly walking over. So this would be something they'd have to consider. Another safety consideration is a contingency plan, and this means that you're planning for any possibility and you're expecting the unexpected. Now in this scenario, they have stuck to a contingency plan because obviously they expected the unexpected and they've started late, and it's starting to get dark, so the teacher involved has had to blow the whistle to bring all the participants back together before it got too dangerous and dark and we wouldn't be able to see where they were going. So the teacher has done good there by sticking to the contingency plan, by bringing a whistle with her, or him. And another safety consideration is precautions. So this is looking for risks or dangers before, during and after, and making them controlled. And before, this is where maybe the scenario could have been improved, because before people didn't know how to get there, so it should have been the teacher's responsibility to make sure either take them there or give them a map. During, people getting lost and it getting dark. This is something they may not have expected, but this is something that they could work on by starting at an earlier time, so even 3 o'clock may be a bit late to start, to make sure even if they did run over, then it wouldn't be dark by the time they finished. And after, making sure everyone's back safe, so the teacher should have taken a head count after the session finished, just to make sure that everyone that arrived to do the orienteering activity arrived safe back home that evening as well. Now, scenario 3 is bouldering, and the first environmental consideration is the Countryside Agency, and this is the government's advisory body responsible for all aspects of the countryside. So they make sure that nothing is damaged. For example, in this scenario, it's not been done in an indoor bouldering centre, it's done outside. So that it's under the Countryside Agency that they would have to make sure that the climbers are not damaging the rocks. So this means it's also the teachers or the instructors' responsibility also to make sure that the climbers are doing the correct techniques, etc., so that they're not damaging any of the surrounding environment. Another environmental consideration is the Countryside Code, and this is the code where you have to close the gates, you can't litter, you have to protect the plants and animals surrounding you, you've got to control the dogs and consider other people. So for example, in the scenario they brought crash mats, and they, as a safety precaution, but what they didn't do is check that they weren't putting these crash mats onto any plants or anything any habitats that, for example, a rabbit hole, if they're putting a crash mat over the rabbit hole, that would close up the hole, and if they would damage any plants, if people were falling and treading on the crash mats, then this would damage the plants below the crash mat, and then once the crash mat's taken away, then they're not savable. So this is something they should have considered before taking part in the activity outside. Now, a safety consideration is the hazards and risk assessments, and in this scenario no risk assessments were taken before they did the activity, which means if anything had potentially happened, which it did, for example, someone had hurt her ankle, she's fallen off and hurt her ankle, this could have been prevented by taking a risk assessment and putting control measures in there so that she wasn't as injured. However, they did do the right thing by taking her away from the area, making sure no one was climbing so they could give all their attention to her, and then take her to a professional medical environment. Another safety consideration is safety equipment, which they followed in this scenario. So for example, they were given bouldering shoes, which are non-slip, and they were given helmets as well, because in the bouldering centre you wouldn't be given helmets, but outside you would, because if you fell there's a possibility that you could hit yourself on a rock, and that's a lot harder than the holes in the bouldering centre. And the last scenario is skydiving, and the first environmental consideration is pollution. And obviously this is a very big consideration with planes, because if you have a plane in an open space area, that's going to give out a lot of pollution, there's a lot of fuel involved, so this is something that they have to consider when skydiving. And another environmental consideration is the disturbance of flora and fauna. So for example, it is the skydiving centre's responsibility to make sure that the area they have, there is no plants that need to be protected, because for example, if they jump out of the plane and then they land, normally you land on the ground quite heavy, so if you're landing on flowers and plants, you're going to ruin them. And if you're landing on areas where there are the flora and fauna, then this is not abiding to the Countryside Act either. And pollution and disturbance of flora and fauna are also another key considerations for the environment. For the safety considerations, they have to make sure they follow by the HSE, which is the Health and Safety Executive. And the HSE works with the AALA, so this means that they're following risk assessments. This prevents serious injuries, and throughout this assignment you can see the risk assessments being taken out, and risk assessments are rated by severity and probability, and then you multiply them together, and if the value is either a high or very high risk, then either serious control measures have to be taken out, or the activity has not been done whatsoever. So for example, in this scenario, a risk assessment has been taken out, so they have done the right thing, and the participants were also briefed about the risks as well, that what would have happened, and preventable measures that they could do to help if there was any serious thing going on during the dive. And another safety consideration is emergency procedures. And again, these are things such as risk assessments. So the emergency procedures are happening, what things if they do go wrong. So if I go down to the next slide where the skydiving risk assessment is, you can see both of the risk assessments are quite low to medium risk. So this is okay to be able to take out. And this is because for both the scenarios, something seriously wrong could go wrong, which could end up in a serious injury. So for example, if you're falling out of the plane too low and then you're not making sure you have enough air time to slow down and then land safely, and also if there's no backup parachute or faulty parachute, both of the scenarios mean the instructors have to have training in what to do in emergency procedures. So here, this scenario has followed the emergency procedure safety consideration because they carried out a risk assessment and the trainers have been trained to know what to do if they have to put any measures in place.